India's options against China. What all can India do? Find out here. Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Aadi Achint. As I just mentioned, I'm here to talk about what are the options in front of India against China's belligerism in this region. These are not just military options but strategic and economical options as well. Let's have a look and find out what is the best options that the Indians can take against China. India as a country itself is pretty important as a landmass situated in the region where it is. It forms a particular side of the Indo-Pacific. The area itself is known as the Indo-Pacific. What can one say more? A stronger and a more confident India in all aspects is very important for the containment of China in today's world. India as a country plays an important role in the ongoing tussle between USA and China. The Chinese would have taken these steps to push back India, showcasing its strength. I don't think even the Chinese could have dreamt of the kind of response that they received from the Indian side. I'm quite sure that the leadership of the country as well as the PLA would have got a shock of their life. Before I begin, one thing I'd like to say is we can all thank China for shattering any illusion that we may have had of having a harmonious, cordial working relationship with them. One thing that comes out is deceit, land grab and aggression is part of their diplomatic rulebook. China and its leadership's consistent efforts to undermine India in a lot of forums around the world, as well as what they're doing in our borders, has made another thing very clear, that the Chinese have made up their mind about India as a country. They foresee India as one of the only powers that can actually stop the Chinese growth to the so-called superpower that they dream of being. Coming to what India can do, no single choice would give India what it exactly wants. It is always a combination of multiple efforts on various different fields around the world which will give the required result. This, of course, with a lot of tweaking and turning as required by the situation prevailing. Firstly, it is gratifying that the Indian leadership has chosen to keep the path of the dialogue open between both the countries. This showcases a huge diplomatic win in the fervor that India needs to create about China across the world. Let's come to some strategic things that the Indians can do or have done and support it better by further actions. The first thing that I'd like to mention is the mutual logistics support agreement that was signed on the 3rd of June with the Australians. After that, the Malabar exercise, which involved the Royal Australian Navy, would have put across a fear that the Chinese wouldn't have fed for a long time. I believe India should move forward not just with Australia but many other countries to foil the designs of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean region. Now, why I say that is because India also needs strong partners who can help balance the weight against China. One thing that the Indian leadership keeps talking about is multilateralism. India could potentially use multilateral institutions such as the United Nations to keep on bringing up the Chinese aggression in the region and keep the topic going amongst many of the countries. The Chinese, of course, can use a veto in the United Nations, which would lead up to a huge diplomatic backlash for China. The third thing I'd like to talk about is regional balancing. Apart from the big quad that has been created of the 4 countries against the Chinese in this region, India could also pursue its alliances with other Southeast Asian nations that have their own issues with China. Countries apart from the quad like the Philippines, Singapore and Vietnam currently, and in the future probably Indonesia and Malaysia, could potentially be incorporated into some sort of an alliance against China. These are all the countries that are concerned with the Chinese aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, thereby restoring the balance of power where it belongs in this entire area. I believe that these diplomatic ties should not just be fast-tracked, they need to be moved up to warp speed. With its infinite soup bowl of various different organizations, these all forums can be used by India to create an alliance against China. This especially with the GCC countries, which are the hydrocarbon exporting countries. We all know the Chinese dependence on these countries to buy its own fuel. This by sending a clear message to the Chinese that the Malacca dilemma that it's so scared about can also be moved across to the Straits of Hormuz, where 90% of the Chinese oil flows through from. India can target China's soft underbelly, characterized by issues of Xinjiang, of Taiwan, of Hong Kong, and its own sinking economy, which results to my next point, the complete disassociation of India from the One China policy, to pass a very stern message to China that if it can interfere with Indian matters such as Pakistan, India can also take steps that would start hurting it pretty badly. I say this, it is far beyond the time that we need to establish diplomatic relations with Taiwan. It needs to be done today. Militarily speaking now, Building up of a sufficiently large military with very good capabilities could allow the Chinese to have a sense of fear before they take any aggressive action against India or any of its allies in the near future. Open up military discussions with countries that I mentioned just a short while ago. They have all shown interest in the BrahMos missile. I say let's sell it to them before we arm ourselves fully. Little known to the world, the Taiwanese theoretically have the potential to develop nuclear weapons. We need to work very closely with the Taiwanese to help them develop their own potential nuclear deterrence. I say this, make Taiwan the Pakistan of China. Talking about nuclear deterrence, the Chinese think they have a large arsenal of weapons. One must realize it doesn't take a large arsenal of weapons. It takes the right weapons at the right time for full deterrence that needs to be achieved. Testing and upgradation of ICBMs as well as nuclear-powered submarines for the Indian Ocean region. ICBMs to target cities, the main cities of China like Shanghai and Shenzhen, could deter the Chinese from taking aggressive stands in the future. The Indian neighborhood first policy needs to be applied very strongly by us today. What we can see in the past couple of years, relations with some of its neighbors have come to a sort of a standstill. The recent visits by the high-level officials from India, along with the army chief's visit to West Asia, seems like a big step in India gaining power in its own sphere of influence. These kind of efforts must continue. With now the vaccine coming in, it is one of the biggest strengths in Indian hands to ensure that the neighborhood is supported by us. Some defense experts pretty rightly mention, and come to think of it, it makes a lot of sense, that India has been preoccupied with the security of its borders in the north, and the southern part has been ignored for a large part of our history. In the military domain, the maritime region is something that we cannot ignore anymore. With the recent exercises conducted by the Quad and the effect that it had on the Chinese needs to be noted. India needs to develop, it is to a large extent, but it needs to develop further maritime power in this region by developing more and more aircraft carriers as well as nuclear powered submarines. Now I'm going to talk about something a little more aggressive. Counter intrusions into Chinese territory. What stops us from doing that? We've been Indians and we are very calm, and we always say that we do not have any interest in others' land. Well, Ladakh is our land. I say we do it, and we do it so loudly that it rings around the world against the Chinese. The Chinese, being a very large economic power, must have this notion in their mind that what could India do to them economically. The attempt made by the Indian government to restrict the Chinese technology as well as Chinese companies from directly investing into India and taking advantage of the slowdown provided for by the coronavirus, also provided by the Chinese, is a big step towards sending a message to China. India is a large market and must learn to utilize the power of its consumers. The app ban that was conducted some time back resulted in the Chinese firms incurring a loss of over $6 billion. This also started a domino effect across the world, where a lot of the stronger powers in the world started to review the Chinese applications as security threats. An advisory that could be released towards tourist travel in China, reduction of presence of Indian students in Chinese universities are some of the softer things that India can do, but they result in a huge amount of damage to the Chinese economy. The push for boycott of Chinese products and a nationwide movement to boycott the Chinese products has of course given us very good results, especially during Diwali. Apart from this, creation and maintenance of an easier tax regime for companies around the world looking for an exit from China and an entry into a better system could be done to ensure that our ratings of ease of doing business keep going up and up. India's pushback towards China has given China a major loss of face in its so-called image of a major power in the international fora. This has happened at even the domestic levels in China. Although the news of these things don't come out, but there are clear-cut signs that a lot of analysts have seen of this actually happening. One of the biggest signs is the Chinese beating the drums about their capabilities, especially militarily, which shows their frustration of the fact that things are not going their way. As far as social media is concerned, we all know the Chinese don't have any of the free social medias that we all like to use, like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, so on and so forth. They have built up a kind of a firewall across their country for news of the reality which should not penetrate into their borders. But a fervor which is created around the world, which has a huge amount of discussion, does penetrate to the bottom line in China, and that is what India must do to actually keep on harping about these issues and create a big, for the lack of a better word, drama about the Chinese intrusion into Indian territories and the other Chinese designs in this region. One must also understand the Chinese have not fought even a single war since the late 1970s, and that too with a smaller adversary like Vietnam, who thrashed them and threw them back. India must celebrate and publicize these things. India must also celebrate its victories against China. Of course, the dismal 1962 war, but that war brought about certain battles that showcased the might of the Indian soldier. The battle at Rizangla, for that matter. The battle at Nathula, where the Chinese were taught a lesson at that time. I wonder why India is not talking about the more than 100 casualties that were inflicted on the Chinese for the loss of 20 of our brave soldiers in the Galwan Valley. There is a certain news which is floating around talking about the fact that the Galwan Valley martyrs would be given gallantry medals. These guys need to be honored, and the full story of their bravery needs to be put across. Opportunities to make films, movies, as well as books about this incident must be given to the general public to publicize India's victory over the Chinese. India's approach against China, after having mentioned so many things, would need to be flexible, would need to be proactive, would need to have deep monitoring of the socio-economic and the geopolitical situation existing in the world today. It is not an easy game to play between both the countries, and I'm sure by now that the Chinese also realize that they have stepped into something that they can't resolve themselves. They can keep sitting there for all they want, so are we. One interesting news that came out that was very funny yesterday, that the Chinese were giving lip balms and moisturizers to their soldiers in these high altitude areas. It makes me laugh, and it really has nothing for me to explain on this particular subject. There's also another news which talks about the removal of about 10,000 soldiers from the Pangongso area because the place is getting a little too cold for the Chinese. Well, that's the Chinese soldier for you. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends, and yes, of course, don't forget to share a thought for the soldiers standing in the battle lines against China in the east and Pakistan on the west. Once a day, every day. Jai Hind.